Come, Nerevar, come,
Take a seat.
and get ready for the truth about our savage and hairy neighbors up in Skyrim. No, I'm not talking about bears. Those are more reasonable. No, I'm talking about the Nords. And I'll give you 10 reasons to not like them one bit, Nerevar. Mind you, it's not ordered by importance. They would all be number 1 otherwise. Let us begin with number 10. They have a superiority complex. Nords are a prime example of mortals' boundless self-importance. Their arrogance truly knows no bounds, and it's almost endearing how they strut about, puffing up their chests and boasting of their supposed greatness. It's a pity, really, that their words are as empty as their mead halls. They're so enamored with their own supposed superiority that they can't even see how laughably ignorant they are. Their racism runs deep, like a river of ignorance that they swim in daily. They make the Telvanni look like saints in comparison. It's almost cute how they cling to their misguided beliefs as if shouting them louder will make them true. What fools they are. And those bodies of theirs, so large and imposing, as if size could compensate for their lack of substance. It's as if they believe that by bulking up their muscles, they can somehow make up for the deficiencies of their minds. Number 9. They are fake nationalists. Those nationalist and self-proclaimed patriots of Skyrim, a land as harsh and unyielding as their stubborn attitudes. Their so-called pride in their holds is nothing but a flimsy facade, a convenient excuse to avoid any form of productive labor. Why toil in the fields or contribute to the greater good when you can cling to your provincial bickering and false superiority? Yes, it's truly a spectacle to behold, watching them squabble amongst themselves. Their internal divisions so frequent that they might as well rename their nation Divided Skyrim. Number 8, they have no hygiene. The Nords' hygiene habits, or rather their complete disregard for them, are nothing short of offensive, both to the senses and to any semblance of civilization. They seem to have embraced their own filthiness with open arms, much like they've embraced their ignorance of the complexities of politics and their repeated failures as a so-called nation. Their self-care routines, if you can even call them that, are practically non-existent. It's almost impressive how they manage to exist in such a state of perpetual disarray. The casual way they go about avoiding soap and water is just another glaring example of their sheer laziness and their utter lack of respect for the nostrils of those unfortunate enough to be in their vicinity. Indeed, the Nords are a blight upon the standards of personal hygiene that the rest of us hold dear. They are an embarrassment to all races, not just their own. Number 7, they have no culture. The Nords' so-called pride in their supposed culture is nothing short of absurd, a farce perpetuated by those who have deluded themselves into thinking they possess anything unique at all. In reality, they have no culture to speak of. Their noble Nords, who fancy themselves as the epitome of Nord tradition, are nothing more than poor imitations of Imperials. They dress like Imperials, walk like Imperials, and let's face it, they even talk like Imperials. It's as if they've taken a crash course in cultural mimicry and failed miserably. In their futile attempts to mimic the so-called sophistication of the Empire, they've managed to toss aside what little culture they might have had, feeble as it was. It's almost comical how they cling to their borrowed traditions and call it their own. Number 6, they have no honor. Ah, the Nords and their laughable notion of honor. It's almost cute how they cling to this facade of virtue, but in reality they're nothing more than a horde of drunken barbarians. Discipline, self-control. Those words have no place in their vocabulary. They're more likely to reach for a mead horn than to show restraint. Their so-called warriors are nothing but brutes in furs, prone to resorting to violence at the slightest provocation. They don't discriminate. They'll beat civilians, slaughter those who've surrendered, and in their most bizarre display, shout people to death as if a thunderous voice can somehow replace true combat skill. They're not warriors, they're nothing more than drunken thugs with weapons. To think that they have the audacity to call themselves honorable is a mockery of the very concept. They believe that brawling in a mead hall somehow qualifies as honorable combat. Number 5, Skyrim is not a paradise. Ah, the Nords and their undying pride in their wretched land. It's truly a sight to behold how they can look upon a landscape teeming with bandits, beasts, and the restless undead, and manage to convince themselves that it's something to celebrate. Yes, Skyrim, a place where danger lurks around every corner, where the very ground seems to conspire against any semblance of peace or prosperity. It's simply delightful, isn't it? Instead of taking any meaningful action to cleanse their land of these threats, the Nords prefer to engage in their favorite pastime, complaining. They wax poetic about how wonderful it is, as if the constant danger and desolation are marks of true paradise. Perhaps they've become so accustomed to the misery that they've convinced themselves it's something to be proud of. Number 4, Nords are always in conflict. They are a race perpetually embroiled in their own internal conflicts, like children squabbling over toys in a sandbox. It's no wonder they remain so blissfully ignorant, for they're far too busy brawling to spare a thought for learning anything worthwhile. Their history, if you can even call it that, is a pitiful tale of one defeat after another. Let's review their illustrious track record, shall we? They were bested by the Snow Elves, whose greatest feat was freezing everything in sight. Then, not content with one defeat, they managed to lose to the Akaviri not once but twice, in a display of military ineptitude that is nothing short of legendary. And let's not forget their repeated failures against the Empire, Morrowind, Dunmer Raiders, and yes, even mudcrabs. Mudcrabs. It's almost poetic how they can lose to creatures that would struggle to even pick up a sword. Number 3. They are the cause of their problems. The Nords and their grand tales of Atmora, the land of their ancestors. It's almost adorable how they cling to this distant, mythical past, as if it holds any relevance in the present. Yes, they do love to regale anyone who will listen with stories of their ancient homeland, conveniently forgetting the little detail that they fled from it like frightened children. You see, they left Atmora not out of some noble quest for a better life, but because they were terrified of the dragon cult, those delightful practitioners of draconic oppression. So what did they do in the face of adversity? They did what any self-respecting Nord would do. They ran away from their problems, leaving the dragon cult behind, but oh joy, bringing their problems with them to Skyrim. It's almost poetic, really, how they allowed themselves to be enslaved all over again, willingly stepping back into the clutches of their oppressive past. They must have missed the good old days of being subjugated by dragon-worshipping overlords. Is this how they honor the sixth house and the tribe unmourned? Number 2, they couldn't dig a proper tomb even if Talos told them how. The Nords truly are masters of carelessness and sloppiness. It's remarkable how they treat their mighty kings with such a lack of reverence. Instead of giving their monarchs a proper and secure resting place, they opt for shallow graves that anyone with a shovel and a modicum of curiosity can stumble upon. It's almost as if they're inviting them in to ransack their tombs. Necromancers really do have a field day in Skyrim. Why? Because the Nords practically roll out the red carpet for them. They must think it's a brilliant idea to leave the graves of their once mighty rulers wide open, as if to say, "Come one, come all, have a go at our ancient kings and their armies. Look, we will even leave them there with their armor and weapons on." And when these reanimated mummies start causing disaster, what do the Nords do? They complain, of course. As if it's a surprise that the dead come back to life when you practically hand them an engraved invitation to do so. They might as well have dug up the graves themselves and handed the corpses over to the necromancers on a silver platter. And number 1, they are disappointing warriors. Ah, the once glorious companions of legend reduced to a sorry band of lazy, mead-sodden louts. What a tragic fall from grace it must be for those who once inspired awe and admiration. It's a real shame that they've allowed themselves to become little more than a laughingstock in the eyes of Tamriel. But oh, it gets better. Not content with their descent into drunken mediocrity, the Nords decided to strike a deal with the so-called witches to transform into werewolf monstrosities. Why solve your own problems when you can make pacts with beings of dubious intent and lose what little dignity you had left? It's the Nord way, after all. Avoid responsibility at all costs. And what's even more pitiful is that even after gaining these supposed powers from the witches, they can't seem to muster the competence to do anything useful with them. It's almost embarrassing to watch as they fumble around, bumbling through their newfound abilities like children with a new toy they don't quite understand. But of course, when they've made an unholy mess of things, who do they turn to for help? The rest of us, of course. They expect us to clean up their disasters, to swoop in and deal with their stupid witches, all while they sit back and sip mead. Surely there are more things to dislike about them, but that's it for this review on the Nords, Nerevar. As always, remember to raise your thumbs, subscribe to my sermons, and share your thoughts in the parchment below. I thank my patrons for fueling the hate these Enwas deserve and making these sermons possible. Connor Runda, Tanya Davis, unoriginal username Janelle Rambo, Silky Johnson, Vadim C, Zenobia Wolfmoon, and Sovdark.